Welcome to the Blueprint Breakers podcast. What is a blueprint breaker? If you live your life outside the typical traditional lifestyle blueprint, you are a blueprint breaker. We are here to start a conversation, to assemble resources, and to build a community. This podcast is for empowered women in midlife and beyond who are preparing for a powerful next era of life. My name is Amy A. Palmer. I am your host and facilitator for our conversations. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show. To stay connected, up to date, and to receive all of our free resources and gifts along the way, join us at community.blueprintbreakers.com. I'd rather not talk about it, but I feel better when I do talk about it. I'm talking about grief as it's related to trauma, and I'm talking about different types of grief in different circumstances and situations. And what's bringing this to mind right now at this particular time in the year, in my life, etc., is I recently experienced a loss of someone that I was getting to know. And this is not the first time that I have gotten close to someone during the last year of their life. This has happened to me more than once now. And this most recent experience, I honored her in a previous episode, Karen Bellantoni, amazing, amazing woman, impressive legacy, so much impact on the world. The purpose of today's topic is to talk about sort of the aftermath of losing someone. And so let me tell you a little bit of the context of my connection to Karen and what it has sort of led to and what it's triggering in me, etc. So, and it also is all kinds of weird circumstances or coincidences or whatever at play. I met Karen over a decade ago, probably closer to maybe 13, 14 years ago, when I was running my own sales training, consulting, coaching business. I was part of a networking group that was all women who were running sales businesses of some sort. And I met Karen through that group. And we got to know each other very briefly, mostly professionally. And we connected on all the social media sites, etc. But we didn't stay connected in real life. You know, I stopped having my own business and I went back into working for somebody. I moved to California. She was living in New York City. So she was living in Manhattan. I was living in Laguna Beach. And I did not realize that in 2020, she moved back to Laguna Beach, where she had lived a long time ago, less than 5 minutes from where I lived. And she moved there because she had received a stage 4 lung cancer diagnosis late 2019, early 2020. So she went to California to be in a more healthy environment, but I didn't even know she was there. And I was going through my own stuff throughout the pandemic. And it wasn't until I left California, moved back to the East Coast, reconnected with some of our mutual friends, that I found out where she was. And so Karen and I reconnected again, primarily virtually and with another friend of ours. We had some virtual catch-ups, meetups, and then we started working together this past year, working on major projects together. And I knew she had this cancer diagnosis, but the way she talked about it, it sounded like, I thought it was under control. Like I didn't think it was as bad as it was. Learned a lot from her during our time working together. I can see now why she brought me on. It was to finish out some of the work and projects that she was doing. But when she finally got, a prognosis that she didn't have much time left. I mean, it hit me really hard, even though I didn't know her very well. I mean, I was working with her pretty closely, but I didn't know her very well. And all sorts of grief and feelings were coming up. I started grieving over the loss of her while she was still here. And I started grieving over the loss of what might have been, the partnerships we might have had, the collaborations we might have had, the things I could have learned from her, the connections we could have had together. It just, because she was just such a freaking brilliant woman. And when she passed on Christmas Day, the grief, it just really, really hit me very hard, even though I wasn't in her inner circle. And I realized that I was searching for meaning. Like, why did I become connected to this person in this way at this time in her life and my life? I don't have all the answers for it, but I do know that my connection with her got me thinking about a lot of things. It got me thinking about end of life. It got me thinking about loss and grief. It got me thinking about relationships and relishing them, cherishing them when you have them. Also, the fact that she did not have a close family. Her mother had passed several years ago. Her sister had passed several years ago, and that was all who she had. So she did have a fear of, dying alone. And I know that that's something that those of us who don't have a partner and don't have kids, that's something that we think about, and that's something that we worry about. And I watched in amazement and awe as Karen's chosen family came together in such a beautiful way. They came together, they stepped up. She was not alone at all in her final days, weeks, and months. And that was very, very encouraging to me. And it also reinforced what I knew to be the importance of having a chosen family and not just assuming that certain people are going to, take care of things, like having people in your life that are going to step up and be there for you. Karen absolutely had that. She had a huge tribe of people who rallied for her. And the feelings of grief, it really lingered for me for quite a while. And I've been thinking a lot about that. I'm trying to figure that out. And I realized it had a little bit of sort of a triggering effect, sort of a shampoo effect. And I've heard this before, that when you grieve over the loss of someone or something or whatever, that it can bring back viscerally the feelings of other losses that you've had. So it absolutely did that for me. And then I realized that there's different types of grief and different layers of grief. And the reason why I'm talking about this today is because I'm not sure that we spend enough time talking about it. There seems to be some sort of honor in not having to talk about it, being able to like push it down or push it to the side or ignore it or push through or whatever. And I'm definitely learning that that's not the case. You have to let it, you have to experience it, and you have to let it out. And I feel like talking about it and sharing it and shining a light on it is something that we all need to do. But there's different types of grief. And so the types of grief that was getting tapped into for me was multiple types simultaneously. So I was grieving specifically over the loss of Karen and what might have been and our future friendship together. I was definitely mourning the loss of all of that. At the same time, I was home for the holidays while this happened, and I was navigating daily feelings of grief and anxiety related to my parents who are still very much with us. But I'm definitely experiencing what I've called anticipatory grief. And then I found out that that is a term. I didn't make it up. anticipating future grief. So I'm navigating this weird anxiety over my parents getting older and over the future loss of them. And I keep projecting what is that going to feel like, and how am I going to survive that, and what's that going to be like for them, and what do I need to do for that, like just all kinds of worry and anxiety about stuff in the future that I don't have any control over, especially now. But it's definitely a feeling of grief and like wanting to cherish every single moment with them, but then at the same time being very, very effective by the change, watching people that you love aging, and the change in the dynamic of the relationship, and just projecting out to the future. Lots of fear, tons and tons of fear. And especially because obviously I have a lot of peers who have lost their parents, a parent or parents. And I think about that and I marvel because I have no clue how they handle it. I do have some friends where we talk about it a little bit, but it's not talked about that much. I mean, when somebody loses a loved one, it feels like the level of sympathy, empathy, understanding, open communication around it varies depending on the nature of that particular relationship and depending on like how old the person is. I mean, and maybe this is just me, maybe this is just how I've experienced it in the past, but when I hear of somebody losing a parent, I do feel sympathy, but it feels like, oh, well, that's life. That's what's going to happen. I don't know that I've had like full understanding of what that loss means for that person. And I don't know that we openly talk about it and give that enough grace and space. But again, that could be me, that could just be me. I don't know. So that grief is being triggered. And I'm rambling on about this with you because I want to hear your thoughts about it. I want to hear, like, if you've lost a parent, I'd love to hear how you navigated it. And if you felt like, was there enough sympathy, understanding, and empathy in the world when you were going through that? I'm curious about that. I'm curious about the feelings of anticipatory grief. If there are others who, similar to me, are navigating that piece. Maybe you're a caregiver for one of your parents, and that's a different type of the experience. There's also the grief. I mentioned this is not the first time that I've gotten close to someone in the last year of their life. Many, many years ago in my late 20s, I lost my significant other, partner, whom I was living with, suddenly, very tragically, violently, and I was there at the time. I was present. So that's a whole other level of trauma and grief. And why do I bring that up? I bring that up because I feel like these different types of grief all trigger each other. They're all sort of connected. And I thought that I had become a master at navigating my grief, because when I went through that level of grief and that level of trauma in my 20s, one of the things that I was proud of was how I persevered through that. The help that I got, I had a lot of therapy, saw a lot of different therapists. I did a lot of learning. I did a lot of reflecting. I did a lot, I gave myself room to grieve, and I was able to still thrive in other areas of my life while going through the most difficult emotional experience of my life. And so I've progressed the rest of my adult years feeling kind of confident in how I navigate grief. And now in hindsight, I don't think I have. I don't think I have, because I don't know that I've fully allowed myself to experience it. I don't know that I've fully expressed it and shared it with others. And I think that that grief imprints itself on you, or can imprint, like sometimes I feel like it's in my body. And I know that there's ways to get it out, and there's different forms of therapy to get it out. And there's breath work that can be done, and, a lot of just sort of internal work. And it wasn't until recent years that I've really been trying to do that through breath work exercises, through Reiki, through, just really exploring some of my more spiritual side, trying to get this physically out of my body. And what I was reminded of with this most recent experience is it's not out yet. And maybe it never will be. I don't know. I've shared many times that I've experienced grief throughout my late 30s, through my 40s, into my 50s, grief over not becoming a mother. And that is called disenfranchised grief. And there's a whole community of women out there who have come together, the CNBC community, Childless Not by Choice. Disenfranchised grief is grief that's not openly talked about, recognized, or understood by society at large. I think some of the healing from that comes through sharing and talking and getting it out. I still need more. I need to figure out how to physically get this trauma out of my body, because grief is a part of life, right? I mean, we're sad and we're mourning things because, there are things that brought us joy and things that made us happy. And then if you lose that, or something that we thought was going to bring us joy and we never got to experience that, it's human to experience grief. I feel like I'm still learning on how to navigate it. What's my point in all of this? My point is we need to be willing to share what we're feeling, and we need to be willing to experience it, and we need to give ourselves some grace and space to experience it. Unfortunately for me, all of the intersections of these different layers of grief were triggered and came to the surface while I was on this beautiful tropical vacation with a bunch of friends. And I could not shake it, and I couldn't let it go. And then I've spent days sort of beating myself up a little bit over the fact that I wasn't able to shake it, wasn't able to let it go, wasn't able to fully be present and fully grateful for the amazing experiences at hand that I was having. So I'm trying to give myself a little more grace and understanding of that. My point in this is maybe to get you thinking about that as well. And I'd love to learn from you. Like, what have you learned about grief? How do you navigate these different types of grief? Do you talk about it? And if not, can we talk about it a little bit more? I think our generation, Gen X and baby boomers, like, we definitely have been programmed to suppress negative feelings. There's, and I think that's left over from days when, people were struggling to survive, to put food on the table. So they didn't have time for negative emotions. And we definitely were praised for keeping our emotions in check and keeping them under control. I'm glad to see that the younger generations are letting it. And I think Gen X into the millennials are the ones that have started to model that for their children, with therapy, with honoring emotions, with letting them feel all the feels. People sometimes talk about the fact how younger generations, they just seem to have so much negative going on, so much anxiety, so much depression. So like it seems to have gone to the other extreme. And I think that's because we've sort of opened up the Pandora's box. Like we've just opened it up and we're just letting it all out. And I think we'll find some balance at that point. But I think that there's something that we can learn from these younger generations. So my thought for you is to think about this. Are you experiencing any grief right now, minor, major, on any, like just any type, anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief, trauma, grief, and are you taking care of yourself through it? Or are you ignoring it or pushing it down? So I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to learn from you. I'd love to hear from you and hear what thoughts, ideas, conclusions you have about this. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of the Blueprint Breakers podcast. I'd rather not talk about it. I really would love to hear from you about your thoughts on grief and how you cope and how you navigate. Drop me a line at amy@amyapalmer.com or send me a DM on Instagram, Facebook, wherever we are connected. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your support. Please remember to rate and review this podcast. Your 5-star reviews are very important. And if you haven't yet joined our community, please sign up at community.blueprintbreakers.com. Have a great week. Keep on breaking those blueprints and writing your own.